Welcome, everybody. I know folks are just coming in as we get started. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and I'm joined today by Melissa Patrick, who's Director of Content, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Pearson Higher Education, as well as Jada Bradley, who's Senior Editor of Culturally Responsive Education at Westchester Education Services. We're here today to talk about incorporating DEI in content reviews. We've got two people who do quite a lot of that as part of their role. Increasingly, we're finding that publishers are adding diversity, equity, and inclusion reviews as their frontlist and backlist titles. These reviews can help editors both identify and resolve issues before publication of frontlist titles. Backlist reviews can help address content issues that maybe weren't evident at the time of publication. Publishers taking on this work for the first time often look for direction on basic questions. When should a review be scheduled? How much time should it take? Are there best practices for who should be involved? What skills should they have? And to what extent do you do these reviews within or outside the normal editorial process? And we'll try to answer the question today. If you're new to this topic, how do you get started? I mentioned before that we have both Melissa and Jada joining us. I wanted to start with a simple question. If we could start, Jada, by asking you, how do you describe your organization, your role, and your engagement around content reviews?
Okay, well, Westchester Education Services is a content developer, so we aren't a publisher. We are helping publishers to complete the work, the projects that they initiate. And we usually do K through 12, not exclusively. We've done university work and CTE work as well. So we do the regular classroom subjects, math, science, reading, a little bit of social studies, but we can do a range of projects depending on what a client needs us to work with. And as far as content reviews, I would say it's a two-pronged approach. We will review your content, like you said, blacklist content that you've already published that you think needs a second look, or we can help you create new content that you've never published before and you want to do something totally different. And we can do both. We have projects that take both steps. We review content, our reviewers look and kind of point out what's missing, the gaps in inclusion. And then after we've done that and the client kind of reviews it and makes some decisions, then we go forth and create new content based on what we felt was missing that we pointed out in the review.
And Melissa, I think you're more heavily involved with higher education, but how does your work both align and differ from what Jada just described?
Yeah, so as you introduced me, my role at Pearson is the director of the DE&I content standards review team. And so on my team, we have a DE&I content review program, and then we also provide sort of internal consultation to colleagues throughout higher ed. Pearson, one way that we're different is Pearson's a huge global company with 5 different divisions. So my purview is really just the higher ed division. And for the sake of this conversation, I'm just going to focus on the DE&I content review program, which predates me. I joined Pearson in August of 2021, and the program at that time was almost 3 years old. And we're continuing to mature and evolve. So the way that we're similar is we get involved with both backlist and frontlist and sometimes first editions. But it's primarily backlist titles that we're reviewing, and we're reviewing them at the request of the product teams. And product teams want their backlist title reviewed so that when the new edition is up for revision, they can look back on, they use the backlist to inform the revision process. Yeah, and so we've got a formal review request process. It is we really do try to get involved as early as possible in the manuscript revision, manuscript writing process. It doesn't always happen. For example, when we do have products in the market that might be brought to our attention because a customer is using our product and finds bias in it, my team gets involved, I'll get involved, and we may have to engage in a conversation about what content does get reviewed. Sometimes we need to look at the whole title, front to back, everything. And sometimes it's a more targeted review. Certainly as we become a much more digitized or digital company, the way that we review content is changing. So it's kind of exciting in that regard. Our team is continuing to evolve and change and adapt.
Excuse me. So it sounds, Melissa, like one of the things that you're doing now, particularly for backlist content, is almost like it's on demand. So a product manager may look at a book and or content offering and say, we want some input, or there could be input from the external community, readers or purchasers saying, we really think you should look at this. And that kind of starts you down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes it might even start with we're putting this revision together and we found this, and what do you think about this paragraph? And then it will kind of be this paragraph could use a review, and so could the rest of the chapter. Or yeah, my inbox is full of emails that are basically asking for reality checks. Like a colleague will have a sense that something's not right. Sometimes it's very obvious, but not always. And they'll need to talk about it.
And
Yeah, we do more project basis. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you're kind of at arm's length relative to, it's somebody's asking you to support their work, but maybe there are similarities in what Melissa just described.
Well, it's more of a project basis because we're not an in-house reviewing team. So she has an email full of people asking about maybe a paragraph, and she can maybe expand that to do a page in a book. Whereas publishers come to us and they don't have in-house content review teams. And so they usually have a set of materials they want reviewed instead of just having one, because I don't know that they want to call us and say, we have one book for you to look at. Although that does happen. Recently, we've actually done some novels, and it started out with one novel, and then they added a few more. So we can do one at a time, but normally they have a set of curriculum. It could be the student text, teacher guide, and the ancillaries. It could be an entire online program offering that they're deciding to review. I would also say that publishers can think about, besides, when the bias, someone points out and says, hey, we don't like this doesn't seem right. You could also consider when you're periodically revising anyway, especially for assessments. People tend to revise assessments more often than, say, an entire textbook series. And when you're doing your new assessments, think about having people review the ones you already did, or bringing people in to help you with that content. Because if you have to create new assessments periodically because you just have to retire old questions, then you should think about what you can do to make them more inclusive, and not wait until someone takes a test and a parent or a teacher or someone calls and says, this question's terrible,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And having a bank.
And so and the advantage there is that as you said, the shelf life or half-life of assessment instruments is shorter than it is for a full text. Jada, maybe if I stay with you, how do you budget time for a content review? And I imagine it varies a lot, whether it's a given title, a client, or a topic.
Well, for the novels, we returned them in less than a month because we had reviewers who were ready and willing to review the novel, and it didn't take that long. When you're talking about a curriculum set, it could be months. It depends on how much you have and how complex We've done things where there's thousands of pages and tens of reviewers reviewing for a period of months. And usually we can turn things in, not at the end, like say it's 3 to 4 months. We're not going to wait till 4 months. We're going to turn things in and discuss it along the way. So it's not a matter of you're sitting, a publisher's like, in 4 months from now, we'll get our reviews back. It's not like that. We can work on a rolling basis. So, but I would say when you're talking about an entire curriculum set or an entire set of materials, it could be months, which is something that publishers usually plan for. And they look at their budgets and see when they want to have something ready and how much they're willing to spend in order to have something reviewed for the coming school year, for example. That's not to say we don't take emergencies or last minute things, but when you're thinking about a thoughtful review process, it's going to take months, not a whole year necessarily, but you're going to need to put a few months in at least to get the material to us, have it reviewed. We send it back. Maybe you have questions for us. We have to answer those. Sometimes people don't have questions. Depends on the format. Some people use like more of a spreadsheet format for the commentary and the reviews. And then, their editors sort through the spreadsheets and kind of look and see what they want to change. So I would definitely say one piece of material, less than a month. A set, a few months at least.
Right, so you definitely have to incorporate that into your planning in any editorial plan. Melissa, how about for you? You're doing different types of content, but are you working on similar schedule?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I joined the team in 2021, it was a 2-week turnaround time, and that would include the review as well as the QA. On my team, I have 2 senior content development specialists who sort of coordinate and manage our freelance readers, who we actually train and certify in-house. And so our freelancers will do the review, send it back to us. My 2 senior content development specialists will then look at it to make sure that the flags make sense, that the credible citations are good, that any hyperlinks that are involved work, that it's as tight and meets as high a standard as possible. And so once it's ready and done, we then send it back to the product team that requested. I do want to say that it's up to the product team to decide what recommendations they incorporate, into their content. And sometimes it's actually an ongoing conversation between the product team, the author team, and me. So yeah, so it's definitely a process, but in terms of what we promise, and now we've given them more, we have a much more a more realistic time frame, and that is, we say 3 weeks. So it's because 2 weeks was a very tight turnaround time, especially when you're talking about dense academic material.
From your perspective, Melissa, are there best practices for who should be involved in a review? I think you've given a lot of thought to both how you hire for freelance as well as who should be on staff reviewing the content.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of stakeholders involved when we're talking about reviewing content, especially through an equity lens. So starting with the product teams, certainly we want the senior most person sort of initiating the request as well as the remediation process. However, that person's general manager will have ultimate sign-off approval for any flag that we have identified as high risk. We have a policy that high risk flags get remediated no matter what. And if there's an exception, then it has to be approved. But in terms of who should be involved, so they're the product teams, and accountability needs to be built into that. Then in terms of on my own team, I've had the good fortune of being able to grow my team a little bit. So since joining, we have 2 senior content development specialists who split the QA work. However, they also, one is focused on US products and the other US products, US teams, and the other one on has a more global approach, because Pearson Higher Ed does have we do work around the world. And so she is located in England and is able to manage projects and help our international sibling offices develop their own localized DEI content program. So they have a background in writing, in research, and their own sort of discipline homes, so to speak. And then there's 2 project managers on the team as well. In terms of the freelancers, yes, it's not work that anybody can do at all whatsoever. You can't just pull somebody in off the street. There's a sense of professional and also lived experiences that I think help inform the DE&I readers, the sensitivity readers, and when they in how they do the work. I mentioned we do train, but there also has to be a willingness to be curious, not just about other people's lived experiences, but also their own connection to maybe their own experiences with being othered or feeling like the other. They need to be good writers. They need to be able to do something which is very challenging, and that is hold big ideas. At the same time, be very methodical and detail-oriented with record keeping. They have to be able to think about, identify, and synthesize multiple perspectives. It's challenging. We actually have, we do ongoing coaching with our freelancers. So one of the senior content development specialists, in addition to QAing the freelancers' work, they also will do one-on-one coaching so that we can say, you know, this last review, it was great, this worked well, these are some, you know, areas that we'd like to see you tighten up, and that there's some improvement that could be had. So yeah, it's ongoing. I love this work. I love this work. I do. I could talk about it for hours.
And Jada, you have a similar challenge in that you're serving clients from, I think, many different markets, many different purposes. How do you find the right people to work on their projects?
It's a similar process. I do Q&A and coaching. I mean, and I also learn a lot from our freelancers. I mean, hopefully they learn from me and I learn from them. So it's an exchange. It's not just me saying, this is bad, this is wrong. They're also sharing things with me that I may not have known. When I'm assigning projects, there are some people who really have certain areas of expertise, and I try and keep them in their lane. And then other people have a broader level of being able to speak to marginalization and othering. So everyone is not a generalist when it comes to this work. Some people are going to kind of need to stick to specific things, and that's okay, because we need both. We need people who can look at all kinds of materials and point out what might not be right. And then people are going to say, look, I really need to stick to this, and that's fine. So we have both. And I mean, they're not my best friends, but they do feel hopefully comfortable sharing with me. So then I do learn from them, and they do inform me of things that maybe I was not aware of, just like I'm informing them of things that maybe I thought they missed in a review. They'll also tell me things that I'm not aware of, and I'm never not surprised. I mean, there's some things that are pretty blatant, some flags that just go, oh, yeah, that's bad. And there are things that I just don't think about. We had some reviews of math, and I will say, you know, the reviews are not just humanities, it's math and science too. There's bias everywhere. And an unexpected reviewer said, you know, I changed this because it said something about an ottoman, and can't they just say footrest? And I thought, you know what? He is so right. And I don't think I read the material before he did, because I can't read all the material we have before the freelancers do. But I thought, wow, would I have even said that? You know,
Right.
a footrest is a fine description of that piece of furniture. You don't need to say ottoman.
As long as it's not the Ottoman Empire.
Well, that's the thing.
Well,
It was a
that's
math problem about furniture. So you don't, he's like, call it a footrest. You don't even need to use
right.
ottoman. Let's make it real simple.
Yeah.
Right. And it sounds, Jada, from your earlier answers that the reviews that you do are very much of the normal or traditional editorial workflow. It's just they've decided they want to incorporate your review of this to, you know, to make sure that it's culturally responsive, as an example. But it's still part of the normal workflow, and you just have to budget time for it.
It is and it isn't. I mean, I also do some in-house reviewing. And so I work with some of my colleagues on projects that aren't mine, but that, you know, pertain to them. So I guess if you want to say, yeah, it's part of the regular workflow. With the novels, for instance, we did some novels that were going to be reissued. So they were already issued. And then the company said, we're going to reissue them. And here are the manuscripts. And we kind of want to go to print. So can you look at these before we get to print? And they were already out, though. They were already out in the world in another version.
Right.
So they were just like, we're going to redo it. And now we need someone to kind of help us spruce it up before it goes out again.
Spruce it up.
I mean, I'm being, yeah, spruce it up.
I know what you mean.
And Melissa, with your 2, now 3-week deadlines, that feels very much like a managing editor told you it needed to be back in a certain period of time.
We are definitely on tight timelines. You know, it's constant at this point in time. Product teams know the sooner they can get us their content for us to assign it, the better off everybody will be. Yeah. Sometimes we need to do in batches, you know, because they're rolling. So yeah. I mean, one thing that you said, I think, is just, it's so true. It's about relationship building. It's at least, you know, the way that our team approaches it is it's not review it, make recommendations and pass it. Everybody needs to be learning from each other. And so we're still learning from some of the freelancers. They do have specializations. Sometimes it makes sense to assign them to, you know, to the discipline that they know inside and out. And sometimes we don't, you know, and author teams, you know, just last week, I was really very pleasantly surprised at the feedback that we got from an author who definitely disagreed with one of the flags and said why he disagreed with the flag. And it was based on a deep involvement and connection to the community that he was writing about. And so he knew how that community self-identified. So he knew better in that situation. And I said, fantastic. You know, if only all authors and other teams would be as engaged with the communities that they're bringing into their content to that level. You know, that would be a good thing. So always have to be learning.
And I think that's a point that Jada, you made a few minutes ago, and also in our introductory call, which is that you learn from the process just as much as you're teaching others, or at least there's always the possibility of that.
Definitely. And it's great because as much as I think I know or I've read, I don't know every perspective out there, and I cannot
Right.
sensitively speak to every perspective out there. It would be a real error to think, well, I've read enough, I know enough about these people. Maybe not. When you can get people who know, or people give you feedback, or even
Yeah.
we just sent something out to an Indigenous reviewer, and I sent it out to her because she's a really good reviewer. And she wrote back and was like, yes, I'm related to the person that's discussed in this passage, just so you know.
Oh.
And she's like, it's really great to see my, you know, my ancestor in here
Mm.
being represented in a
Um,
reading passage.
Mhm.
I have one last question for the two of you. Maybe start with Melissa on this. There are people on the call who are probably pretty familiar with this as a topic, but for publishers in particular that are coming to this topic more recently, or maybe for the first time, what advice would you give them to get started? And are there mistakes that you would say, make sure you avoid doing this?
Yeah, definitely. That it's a process. First of all, it's about a review program is about identifying bias and also making recommendations for more inclusive language. So it's kind of they're similar and yet different, and that we're never going to be able to eliminate 100% of the bias because we're human. We just won't be able to, and that that the work is dynamic and it's constantly changing, and so you have to be sort of plugged in and know how to try to keep yourself current as much as possible. Advice when it comes to academic, well, advice would be consider what the members of consider how communities think and speak and describe themselves. So what do I mean by that? I mean, when you're referring to people, groups, communities, countries, you want to use the language that they use as best as possible. And also that this work is it's not about canceling anybody's perspective necessarily. It's about expanding the conversation, including new and different perspectives that maybe have not been included in the past. And it's about being accurate. So I see this work really being about being accurate, providing accurate and inclusive content. So, and that content reviews are not about word searching. So I'm just going to put it out there. And I do see some questions about, AI solutions and tools.
Even though I advise you not to read the chat while you're.
I know I can't help myself.
Yeah.
but
God bless
it's
you.
not.
Well, we'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah, it's not about word searching. So don't make the mistake and think it is, because if you do make the mistake, then you're going to miss things like semantic framing and contextual framing, and you're going to miss a lot if you just think it's a word search exercise.
And Jada, how about from your perspective? I mean, how do you get started here? And are there any cliffs to avoid walking over?
Well, to use an overused word, be proactive.
Mm.
I don't think when you get that email complaint or that flag, be calm about it, but don't necessarily wait for that. Look at what you have that's already out if you're not interested in creating anything new, and think about having it reviewed. I would say, and take your time. You can't come to some, group of freelancers or a team or a content developer, whoever they are, and say everything needs to be reviewed. You have to give it time. Maybe pick the thing you think is the most crucial or the oldest, or the thing that you think really needs the attention. If you don't have a clue and you read it yourself, you think this is great, then, if it's 10 years old, maybe you still do need to have someone review it, just because, as Melissa said, things change, things are dynamic. It's always going to change. We're not going to get rid of all bias, but we can certainly improve things. Consider your audience as well. I do a lot of K through 12. So everyone isn't extremely altruistic, but you do have to think about, what are these kids reading? What are they taking in? What are the children who are going to be adults who run the world when we're a lot older? What are they learning about in school? You might want them to have a broader view than just the view that maybe people had 20 years ago. Not that 20 years ago was fine, but things just are going to keep changing. So I would say don't get overwhelmed, pick something that you think you want reviewed and don't try and get everything reviewed all at once. Keep an open mind, as was said, be curious. If you find yourself feeling reactive because you do that review and then you get the materials or the reviews and you, how could they say that? Take a deep breath, just consider your perspective is yours and reviewers have theirs. And the same thing we say to reviewers. We are not the final destination for these products. You review them, we turn the reviews over, and that's it. We cannot guarantee what's going to happen, but please know that you have your point of view has been heard by someone. If you turn it over to a publisher, that publisher does not change the product. I tell reviewers, the adults who read it had to be exposed to your viewpoint, even if they do not change the materials that they're sending out for K through 12. So keep an open mind and be curious and don't let yourself get overwhelmed by trying to review too much too fast.
Thank you for that. I know we're just a little bit beyond time. Can I borrow a few more minutes from each of you to maybe pose some of the questions that our audience had?
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you, and thanks for the folks who stick with us. We'll send a copy of this recording to everybody who's registered. So if you do have to excuse yourself for another meeting or purpose, please do, and we'll make sure that you get the full recording. One question, actually, Jada, I think you've just answered it, was how can publishing companies implement authentic DEI plans and reviews in their in-house process or processes? And I think, being proactive, being mindful of what your outcome is an important consideration. What is your purpose? I think is what I heard from your answer just to the last question.
Definitely. Again, you could find yourself in trouble and there are flags and you got to react, and that happens to anyone all the time. But hopefully you don't find yourself in trouble and you're just considering how you can make a better product, how you can make something that's more inclusive of different people so that you're trying to get ahead of what could be a potential problem later on.
Right. Melissa, from your perspective?
Yeah, to add on to that, I mean, the way that we look at it, it's not if, it's when something's gonna pop in the market eventually. But we do have an online bias reporting portal that anybody can submit to us and say, look, in this particular title in chapter 7 on page whatever, this is what I found, and this is they'll use all sorts of words, and so that report falls into an inbox on my team. So I monitor that and work with colleagues around higher ed to remedy it. And we will get back to anybody who reports, finding something in our content. We take it very seriously, and we very much value the feedback. And asking for the feedback, I think, is important. I mean, in some ways, it implies that we know that there's going to be missed opportunities for minimizing bias or being more inclusive in how we write about particular topics. I love the word that Jada used, proactive. That's really important. And I'm finding, I'll just say real quickly, I'm finding now, having been in this role for a few years now, that I see movement along an awareness continuum among my colleagues on product teams, where before they may not have been so tuned in, and they are tuned in now. And that's why they will, they'll email me and say, hey, I've got this question, or I'm thinking this might not be quite right. And so it's a process, and now they're able to be more proactive. And it's because, a piece of advice, not to shame anybody when they don't catch the bias, or they don't know about something being not inclusive, or something that is offensive. Because again, the ottoman example, the footrest example, nobody can know it all. And so we have to be understanding of our colleagues. There will be pushback. You will get pushback, and there will be some people who don't understand that this isn't a nice to have, it's a need to have. So I'll stop there.
We have teachers on our team, and sometimes they'll review something and say, I wouldn't use this in my classroom. But that's why we include teachers among our freelancers, because they are people who are actually in K through 12 classrooms using the products that our clients are making, and they can say what they think would work, at least in their classroom, or maybe in them and their school or their colleagues. So yeah, you definitely have to keep an open mind.
This may be something that we send around after, but Shelley's asking if either or both of you could recommend some of your favorite or most trusted resources for in terms of using unbiased language. She indicates that as an editor, she'd love to have books or websites that she can refer to on a regular basis. And that's kind of not quite out of left field, but it might be more specific than you can answer today. But if you wanted to provide us a couple of things, we can send that around to everybody.
Yeah, I can definitely put together a few things to send around. I don't want to name something right now off the top of my head, but
yeah, well, I can quickly tell people, and again, it's sort of, we'll check a few resources. We definitely do collect and have a resource library that we're constantly working at keeping updated. However, like for example, there's something called the diversity, where is it? The diversity style guide. There's the conscious language guide. There's the global press style guide. There's then there are particular organizations that will have their own style guides. You can look to the National Black Journalists Association. There's different journalist groups that will have their own style guides that are, self-selected affinity groups. There's that's just some of them. And there's also, I don't know, can I like plug a book?
Sure.
Is it okay for me to plug a book? There's
I think in this setting, we give you all the latitude you'd like.
Oh, great. I just have to find it. Where did I put it?
While you're looking for it, I'll just mention that to both you and Jada that we'll probably need about a week to put together the recording. So if you have a few notes that you want to email me, we'll include those and send those out with the mention to everybody.
Melissa's more in higher ed, so I can think about some resources that are more geared to K-12.
K-12.
Not that the ones that she mentioned, I've seen some of those are good. So
there's a new book out called The Inclusive Language Field Guide, written by Suzanne Wertheim. That is worth picking up. There's another one also that was written by an Australian person. Here it is. Yeah. So I don't know, these are all. So that's the Inclusive Language Field Guide.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then there's another one.
That one's a little bit harder to read with
editing for sensitivity, editing for sensitivity, diversity, and inclusion by Renee Ottmar. And then there's I've got all sorts of resources. I'll pass them along afterwards.
Thanks. I know that will be really helpful. I really appreciate it. I have one. There's a significant back and forth going on in the chat that, Melissa, I think you saw part of, about the use of AI or large language models. I think from your perspective, are either of your organizations doing that right now to either highlight or not necessarily remediate, but to at least define instances of potential bias?
I'm going to say no. We are aware and we do experiment with AI, but we aren't necessarily employing it in client reviews at this point in time. Because again, as Melissa said, it's not a word search issue. So beyond using AI to look for certain words and phrases, you do have to read the entire sentence and paragraph to notice possibly that the tone is off or something else besides just certain words. Because that's part of the trick, is that if you could just eliminate certain words from text, then be like, no reviewers, just eliminate words. It takes people, humans, looking at things, reading the tone, having possibly lived experience or something where they know this isn't quite right. And again, even if I were doing it, I don't think I'd put ottoman in as one of the words not to use. I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't even think about including that word. So it's more than just bad words. And I just had a teacher say, this book isn't bad, but what I'm finding in this book are kind of like teen movie stereotypes. And the person said, it's not that there's something offensive that you're going to say this is horrible. It's that I read this book and I think that they're stereotyping teens into these groups that are limiting. And I want my students reading that. You'd have to read the book to figure that out. You wouldn't be able to
Right.
find a bad word that would tell you that.
And also keeping in mind that oftentimes it's not what's in the content, it's what's not in the content.
Yeah.
Also, so in its most extreme form, erasure is a major issue. The exclusion of entire groups of people when, just as an example, writing history, or it could be in any. So it's what's not in the content as well. An AI tool wouldn't necessarily be able to pick that up. To answer the question, yes, our company is definitely leaning into using AI, generative AI, for finding solutions, both that our customers could use as well as internally what we can use. And so I am in the process of exploring some sort of tool that my team could use that might help facilitate our work. The reality is that there are some tasks that human intervention will always be necessary for to do it right. And I'm fortunate to know that I'm fortunate to have colleagues who are sort of guiding these internal AI projects who understand that. And so the work that my team does is sort of one of those areas that we're always going to have to check and kind of double check what a future possible AI tool that we use, what it's putting out. We'll have to check it, and it won't replace it. I think of it more as a supplement to the work that we're doing. I hope that answers the question.
Sure. I mean, there are different approaches to this, and I think our role is in part to understand how they're being played out right now. I know I've overstayed my invitation for you, but I did want to ask this question of Jada. It comes from Jody, who's just asking if the work that Westchester Education does includes reviewing prototypes and making recommendations for making them better, maybe from a research-based perspective on inclusive materials. Is that something your team has either been involved with or could get involved with?
We could get involved with that. We're here to review various kinds of materials. So we don't have to review finished products. We don't have to review things that are already out in the market. We can review things before they get to that point. Like I said, we review manuscripts that haven't quite been published yet. So prototypes, yes.
Okay. And we will make sure that everybody knows how to get a hold of you, Jody, if you want to write to us. So I'll put you in touch with Jada. Melissa, Jada, thank you very much for doing this today and for spending some extra time to answer questions. I think that this is a really good conversation, but it really is only the start. We'll be doing some more. I won't make you come on stage to the follow-ons, but we'll make sure that you know when we're doing them again. I also want to thank the audience and all the participants, the range of viewpoints that got aired today, both in the chat and in the question. So as I said, a recording will be made available in about a week, and we'll include resources that we can from Melissa, Jada, and anything else that might come in the meantime. Thanks for being here. Thanks for spending the extra time, and we really appreciate you being part of our content panel.
Thank you for having me.